Good evening and a happy new year to you all. My name's Justin Wateridge, and it's a pleasure to welcome you here to the first of this year's Steps Travels in conversation with the wonderful Sophy Roberts. I'm thrilled to have Sophy with us here tonight. I'm sure she's well known to you all. If not, shame on you. Not least that she's featured in our latest Steps Travel magazine. But Sophie's one of the, if not the best travel writers at the moment. She is the host of a wonderful podcast called Gone to Timbuktu that I would urge you all to listen to. She's the author of two books, the first of which is The Lost Pianos of Siberia, which I think, Sophie, was the Times book of 2020, or one of the Times books of 2020. And her latest book, which came out last year, A Training School for Elephants. And I'm sure we'll touch on both of them. But Sophie, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Justin.
Happy New Year to you.
And Happy New Year to you as well.
So I've always been a huge fan of yours, and I've always admired your curiosity. So what drives that and what inspires you?
Curiosity to travel, I suppose, perhaps, maybe, has got something to do with my childhood. I was brought up on the west coast of Scotland. My father was a farmer. We had a country childhood, and in my early years, no TV. So you had to do your level best.
Is that because your mother threw it in the water?
Yeah, I was just
telling us off screen.
Yeah, I was just telling Justin before we came on live that my mother, she threw she threw the plug of the television into the river beneath our house because there was an argument about which program we were going to watch. But anyway, so I was brought up in the countryside, and you had to find your own fun, you had to find your own adventure, and that's what I always did. I got used to kind of making little journeys of my own. I suppose that's where it all begins. And also it was a kind of, in a way, quite a remote childhood. So I was always sort of reaching out for the stranger. I always was looking for people, because I didn't have a whole lot of them when I was small. And that's a really big part of what I do.
And so how's that curiosity then sort of led to where you travel to? And you talked about you live remotely. Do you go to remote places, or is it the people that takes you there? Or
I think it's a combination of things. I really am drawn to the feeling of fenceless landscapes. And one of the reasons I love Africa, where I've spent a lot of time, one of the reasons I love Mongolia, where there's more horses than there are people, and one of the reasons why I was drawn to Siberia, where I spent 5 years working on this book, The Lost Pianos, especially Siberia in winter, because if there are any fences, they're in deep snow. So it has this sort of feeling as if the world is just been reborn. And I love that sort of sense of scale and depth and width, which I don't, which does have something to do with my childhood. Looking out across the islands of the Hebrides, looking out into the moorland of Estelmuir, where I had the latter part of my childhood. These places, they ring true to me in some way.
So is it because of that sense of space? Because I think when somebody goes on safari, or that you go to a city, you're always looking for things and you're trying to find things. But when you are in the open space like that, you're immersed in the stillness of the moment almost.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it's a kind of a spiritual connection, I think, with space, for sure. You lose track of time, and when time collapses, something magical can happen. And when you're in those environments and there are people who thrive in them, people who live very different lives to me, I find that very compelling. And especially, you don't necessarily need very much in those environments, because it strips you bare in a way. And in that respect, it's a sort of anti-materialistic space as well. I don't know, it takes me back to, maybe I'm a romantic, maybe I'm nostalgic, maybe I'm allergic to the modern world as it feels right now. And those kind of environments they make me feel calm. That's the best way to describe it.
And does that I don't know, that back to your curiosity, I suppose, in terms of, does that affect the assignments you take in terms of travel writing, or how do you decide where you take? Because I'm sure you're inundated with lots of offers to go to different places. So what determines what you take and what you don't, what you say no to?
Um, it's a look, it's a really complex matrix of why you do a job and don't do a job. And sometimes it can be as venal as you need to make some money. But I try very hard for that not to be the only reason. I try really hard for that not to be the only reason, because I don't particularly want to contribute to a tourism industry that takes more than it gives. So I do think about that relatively carefully. But if I'm thinking about my perfect assignment, and I think I've spoken about this with you before, Justin, but I have a kind of what I call an authenticity triangle that I place over the choices I make, and that is it's the three parts of it. There is if a job comes in and I feel that it's something that I can do really well, that I can ambitiously achieve, and maybe I can do it better than others might be able to do it because of a specialism, I'll say yes. I will also say yes if it's got a humanity to it. It's got to have that humane strand. It's got to connect with people in a humane way, compassionately. I will say yes. And then if the third part is really about the enigmatic. I like stories that don't have closed endings, that have a sense of possibility that a little miracle may occur. So the enigmatic, the ambitious, and the humane. And if all three are in that space of that story, I will say yes, and nothing will stop me. If only two are there, I'll say yes if I need to make the money. If only one of them are there, I must not touch it. So that's how I do my stories, you know.
And you mentioned sort of that sense of possibility. Is that similar to, we've talked before about E.O. Wilson, who's I'm a big fan of, as you are, about he talks about a sense of puzzlement.
Yeah. So E.O. Wilson, Letters to a Young Scientist, is a brilliant book to give somebody who is trying to make their way in the world. Because he has this wonderful phrase, which is you're trying to find an idea to latch on. You're trying to find a subject to interrogate. And if there's not something puzzling about it, then it's not worthy of your time and attention. So he uses this phrase, make use of puzzlement. I would add to that a wonderful line from the poet Robert Frost, who says, a poem begins as a lump in the throat. And I think that is just the most beautiful description of why I want to write, and want to travel, and why I'm curious, far more than my childhood and the rolling fields of that period of my life. It's as I get older, I realize it's like a lump in my throat. And for me, you know, when the Lost Pianos of Siberia was that lump in the throat, it was like there has to be another version of this extraordinary country called Russia that's not just the horrors of Putin's regime. There has to be another story. The same with the Training School for Elephants, which is about Leopold II's march onto the Congo on its resources, 1879, and the scramble for Africa. There has to be another narrative that will draw people into that deep and terrifying and tragic, violent history. But there has to be a counter to that in the humanity of the people who can survive to tell the stories, you know. So I need that counterbalance at all times.
Okay. You mentioned both books there, but let's deal with Lost Pianos first of all. What drew you to that book? How did it all start, and how did it come about?
So it started in 2015. I was in Mongolia, where I have a very dear friend, a German friend who'd married a Mongolian woman, and they lived about 8 hours west of Ulaanbaatar, the capital. It used to take 2 days to get to their encampment of these, you know, these round gers, these tents that they have in Mongolia. And now with the road, it's about 8 hours drive. But we were staying there, and there was about 20 people gathered one evening on a summer's night in Mongolia in one of these tents, and this young woman was playing the piano. Ogdurel Samponorov was playing the piano, a brilliant, brilliant musician. And we were listening, and the smoke was rising from the fire in the middle of this tent, the starry sky above. And the gathering consisted of a few foreigners, myself, my German friend, my husband, and otherwise Mongolians, the herders, the families. And I'd never heard anything so beautiful. She was playing Busoni, Appassionata. It was just the most beautiful piece of music. And I leant over and I said to my German friend, I thought I just never heard. I was crying. It was divine. And he said, no, 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 that piano is not worthy of her talent. You must find her one of the lost pianos of Siberia. And the phrase,
that was the phrase that he used. He came up with
that was the phrase. Yeah, it's totally his phrase. He came up with this phrase. He knew what he was saying. He's a brilliantly artistic man, and it stuck. Pianos, Siberia, put two of the wrong things together. You have that thing I was talking about at the beginning of this conversation about the enigmatic. There's a space in there that is so peculiar, so odd. And after a period of time, I started to interrogate those words. I talked to him. He talked to me about this incredible tradition of German piano makers going to Russia at the end of the 19th century, and the massive legacy those German piano makers had left in that region, and how the piano had started to move across Siberia as governors, exiles, and others started to colonize that part of Russia with European ideas. So the piano becomes the perfect symbol of the European colonization of an Asiatic land, effectively. So yeah, and so I went off and looked for, searched for pianos for 3 years on the ground, and spent 5 years putting the book together. But it was the power of music, the power of words, was enough to kind of, that's my curiosity, I guess. It was enough to make me buy a flight ticket.
A curiosity you have, but the power of words you have. The power of music. Are you musical yourself? Do you have a musicality, or?
I'm not musical. But I have by which I mean I don't play an instrument with any skill, but I love it. I'm drawn to it. I'll travel for it. Music says what words can't. I appreciate it deeply. And Ogdurel, if you've ever listened to this podcast, Gone to Timbuktu, that I do, the music that plays in and out of that is Ogdurel playing. Yeah. And she's playing with this wonderful Morin Kerr, which is the horsehead fiddle. And that music was recorded in that very tent on the very piano.
Wow. And some of the characters that you met on your travels, you said it was 5 years, so you're going in and out the whole time, perhaps not always easy given the sort of political situation in Russia and you being a journalist. Do you want to talk a bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, it was tricky, but also, I tried not to think too hard about it, because otherwise I wouldn't have gone. But this was pre-Ukraine. The Crimea was in the mix, and so it was tense. But the most extraordinary thing about this search I was making for the history of pianos in Siberia, effectively, meant that I could knock on the doors of perfect strangers in the middle of nowhere. And I really mean the middle of nowhere. I was in Kamchatka, I was in Kolyma, I was in Yakutia, I was in the Russian far north, and Yamal, all over, plus the better known places like Lake Baikal, like Ulan-Ude, all of these places. And you knock on the door in a tiny little village where you've heard that somebody's got a special instrument with a special story, and you say, "Hi, I'm British. I'm a journalist, and I've come here to talk to you about the piano." And they open, like, music's like a passport. It completely removes all the politics in the room, and the doors open, and Russia, Justin, the doors open, and you're there for 3 days. And when you open up the top board of a piano, you're also opening up the hearts of people and memories and family and all of these. It was just an incredible mechanism, a neutral passport to be able to talk about difficult and moving things.
So I'm sure it was a mechanism and a neutral passport, as you say, but I'm sure also that just who you are and the fact that you care a lot about people, you give people time, and you take time with people. I'm sure that's how you were able also to get their stories and learn more from them.
But I think time is really important. And that's, again, going back to one of the things I said right at the beginning, is I love it when I'm in places and spaces where time is not on the clock. And I really can lose myself in these environments. And I have a habit that is incredibly frustrating for people that I work with, of not ever wanting to book my next night, because I feel completely trapped if I know the next night of the place I'm staying. I need to be able to flow like water through these things, because sometimes you meet someone and it's a dud meeting, so you move on quickly. And then at other times you can spend a week with a family, like I did in Numpto, this incredible heart-shaped lake up in a place called Hansi-Mansisk in the sort of oil lands of Siberia, where I stayed with a kind of shaman's family for a week. And if I'd been booking one night, and my exit before I knew, it would just never works. You have to honor people with time in the kind of work I do.
No, I think that's true, and I think that moving on to, I'll ask you why a training school for elephants, how it came about in a minute. But I think that I love your descriptions in it, especially of Zanzibar. And you say your yearning of gentler experience of time, and with the speed of getting from one place to another, we no longer absorb each other's nuances at the pace of a weather pattern. We come and go too fast. Time in situ is important to you.
I do think we come and go too fast, and I have to come and go fast as well, because I've got 5 days to report on X in X. So let's be very distinct here between my journalism and the books I do. I do the books because I'm dying, longing, reaching for that space and time that you can't always get when you're on a journalistic assignment for one of the magazines or newspapers I write for. But the Zanzibar, yeah, I mean, that's Swahili, that whole Swahili culture. It's cool like that,
Yeah.
It is slow, it is easy, it is based on the weather patterns of the monsoons coming in and out across India back in the day and going across the Indian Ocean the other way. So it's got this kind of very natural rhythm to it. Of course, that's changing it has changed significantly, but you can hear it in the language, you feel it in the music, all of those. It's kind of a rhythm, and it's closer to the patterns of the natural world than perhaps I live.
So, a training school for elephants, very the world of 19th century of King Leopold, elephants themselves, very different from pianos in Siberia. How did that come about?
It's kind of different and the same, actually, Justin. It's like I've really with the books I do, I want to get into big history. And Siberia, the largest continental prison without a roof, King Leopold's Congo, I mean, on a scale that is just unimaginable. And so it's kind of like common ground. I use also a similar mechanism, the piano, to tell the story of Siberia and my travels through there. And I use the 4 Indian elephants that made this extraordinary journey across the African continent on behalf of Leopold II of Belgium, in order to prove whether or not there was a transport system that might work to extract the continent's resources. Because of course the Asian elephant was utilized completely differently to the African elephant in the history of empire. The Asian elephant was doing wonders for Leopold's cousin, Queen Victoria, in India and Burma, which he went to, and Sri Lanka, where it was Ceylon, which he went to visit. But he was like, why is that not happening in Africa? Why is the African elephant not being used in the same way? So he thought that would be the key, an early key to the kingdom. It didn't quite work out in that way, but it was an obscure, forgotten expedition that I'd come across, actually weirdly in the same year, in 2015, that I first heard that music in the Gare in Mongolia. But so these things, they sit and they percolate for a while. And I picked that story up again when Pianos was published during the pandemic. I started to go into the archives, and I just found this incredible depth and richness of an untold story.
What's unusual about a training school for elephants, though, is that it purports to be about animals, but it's not really.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, it is. It's the story of the four animals, but it's also Frederick Carter and others, and
Yeah,
certainly when you're traveling around, the various people that you meet, from Sister Lydia to Peter Sudi. I don't know if I pronounced his name
yeah.
right, but
Yeah, I mean, it is and it isn't. There's I do my the narratives I'm interested in are multi-braided. So there's animals in there, there's people in there, there's place in there, there's history in there, and there's contemporary travel in there. And I'm trying to weave and weave and weave the lot. I get some letters from readers where the elephants are everything, because that's all that part of the book has grabbed their attention. For me personally, it's the people, it's the contemporary people, the incredible folk that I sort of tracked down that had some connection to this story from 1879. And you think 1879 is too far away. I'm never going to be able to make those connections with something that happened too long ago, but not a bit of it. And a really good example is right at the beginning of my work. I was in Zanzibar, in Stone Town, which has the most remarkable archive from that whole colonial period. And and before, Burton's letters, Stanley, la 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 la. And I was in the archive, and I found a bishop's diary, which was described the 7th of June, 1879, when these four elephants had arrived on their ship, the Chinsura, from India, and they were sitting in the port in Stone Town, and they couldn't be disembarked because it was going to be too much of a kerfuffle. They just needed to sit there for 2 days before going to the mainland while the expedition leaders sorted out all the equipment they needed. So those elephants were sitting in port. The bishop was frustrated because everybody who was anybody on the island was gawking at this ship, dying to get a glimpse of the elephants. And instead, on that very same day, he was trying to ordain the first Black East African deacon, a guy called John Sudi, but no one turned up. And so he was annoyed by these elephants. Anyway, I thought that was kind of interesting, a tiny little side note in the bishop's diary. So I decided to go down to the church about 5 miles outside of Stone Town, where this ordination was meant to have occurred. I turn up, little church, little scruffy graveyard, and an older gentleman was doing his washing among the gravestones in a plastic bowl. I got talking to him. I said vaguely why I was there. He said he was the caretaker for the church. He opened it up. He was called Peter. Peter and I started talking. Peter told me, and it still sends a shiver down my spine when I think of it now. He sat down. He goes, the man you're talking about, John Sudi, the first Black East African deacon, was my uncle. And I sat on his knee as a child. And he was formerly enslaved from a place called Manyara over towards Lake Tanganyika, Congo. And he told me a biography that had never been written in the history books. And more than a biography, he told me how this man sat, how he walked, how he talked, his gait, how he wore his kanzu, all of those things. And suddenly, in this extraordinary moment in time, 1879 came thundering into the room. And it happened right at the beginning of my journey. And I thought, if that just happened, then I have to have faith that this retracing the journey is going to deliver levels of oral history and memory that maybe you don't get in the same way if you don't put your feet on the ground. So and that's what I like to do. I like to get my feet on the ground. It's like Travels with Herodotus. That's a wonderful book by Kapuscinski. He talks about the same thing. Yeah, it's a beautiful book, and it's one of the very first principles of both Herodotus and also Kapuscinski, was a Polish journalist and travel writer, is unless you get your feet on the ground, you it's only when you get your feet on the ground that you can make the connections that matter. And I really believe that. I don't think I can report on the telephone the books I want to write.
And you're meeting with Peter Sudi. To what extent is, I don't know, it's maybe difficult for you to answer, but either serendipity or it's you and your curiosity and your observation of things, people, and just wanting to find out more.
I don't know. I think I don't know. I don't know. It's just I have a certain resilience, I suppose. So I won't let it drop until I can find it. That is part of it. And you I'm a storyteller, so you want to connect things and you keep on working hard to try and connect them. And often when I'm working with, I lead a couple of writing courses. I try to do a couple of teaching a year, these writing
We might come on
courses.
to that, yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it's one of the things that is the hardest thing to teach is the fact that you've got to be resilient. You know, you've got to write and rewrite, report and re-report again and again and again. And that requires a commitment that I sometimes it's not so obvious from outside of the profession I'm in. But when you're in it, you're
Yeah.
in it. So yeah, it's curiosity, but it's also kind of like a professional drive.
So you certainly have curiosity, professional drive, but I know another one of your obsessions is that you have to ground truth, a thought in the place that it belongs.
Mm.
That's something you
Mm.
feel very strongly about.
Yeah, I was trying to write something. It's interesting actually. I was trying to write something about the west coast of Ireland today, and I couldn't. And I was like, I know the west coast pretty well from time I've spent there as holidays, fishing, family, all the rest of it. But I just I couldn't smell it. I couldn't quite get the light. And so I thought, oh, I'll jump on Google and I pulled up some images and I just still couldn't get it. The words were not coming. And I was frustrated by it. And I was like, went out for a walk and maybe thought that was the problem. And then I came back, I said, that's just me. I write in place. Even when I write after coming back from a place, I take huge amounts of audio recordings so that I can play the sound of Lake Tanganyika in a storm when I'm writing about it. It's a sort of like it's a whole kind of sensory experience for me. Yeah, so maybe I need to get on a plane tomorrow to the west coast of Ireland so I can describe County Kerry in a convincing way.
And I know one of your other obsessions is fact checking, and it's making sure that everything that you write is verified, and you're very good and thorough about going back to people and showing them different sort of excerpts from your book and said, are you happy with this, etc. And I know that's hugely important to you.
Yeah, I mean, so, there is a thing in travel writing which I respect, which is the I story, the my journey story, the this happened to me and it changed me story. That is a major trope of the travel writing genre. It's not for me. I am not remotely interesting as the
So you're
person.
not a conduit at all, no.
I'm not, no, I'm
No,
a conduit for others,
rather,
but
sorry.
my story is not the main part of any of the books I want to write. It's just not interesting. So as a conduit for other people's stories, you are being given a very precious thing, which is their truth. So you have to honor that truth and you have to be really careful of how you present it. And so I am careful about checking. I mean, God forbid, of course, I make mistakes. Of course, I am interpreting all the time, all of those things, but I do my level best. And the Africa book is a very good case in point because many of my sources that I worked with as I traveled across from the shores of Dar es Salaam to Lake Tanganyika on the borders with the Congo, DRC, as I traveled across, I met many, many people who contributed to the book who don't have mobile phones. They're not on email. So I had to retrace the journey 2 years later with my manuscript and say, is this what you meant? Have I got this right? Has the interpreter fully understood this? Because we're going through both into Swahili and into a local language, whether it's like, Liguru, whatever it might be. So it is quite a complex process. And I'm sure I've made thousands of mistakes, but you kind of live in dread that email will come in from someone correcting you, but that's the risk you take as a writer.
Excuse me, sorry. One thing you do talk about in the book, or you mention, is decline in biodiversity. and you talk about the government building underpasses for elephants so they prevent them being struck by traffic, etc. Did that sort of strike you in terms of the wildlife you saw or didn't see, maybe?
Yeah, hugely, hugely. It's a completely different world. I was comparing two landscapes, one from 1879, incredibly detailed notes in various, notes and proceedings from the RGS, diaries, letters. I had this absolute richness of information. I could almost trace the journey tree by tree, stream by stream. So when I'm re-following that journey myself on my own feet in a vehicle and all the rest of it, you can see tree by tree what has disappeared, and you can also see the things that have remained. So there's an amazing moment towards the end of the book where there's a sort of very important scene where something historic, a big battle occurs in the historical events, and the baobab's there. It's just there. The hot spring is there, and it's that gives me a thrum when I'm on the ground that is very alive. You really feel it. But when you are looking at landscapes where once that took 2 weeks to walk through because of the thickness of the thorn, and now there's nothing. Nothing. I mean, one of the women, a woman called Edda Mapwepwe that I interviewed, said, even in her lifetime, she remembered that forest of thorn. And now she said that they've left me with the Sahara Desert. Tanzania's got a huge, huge and growing human population. They need places to live. They need land to grow their crops. And wildlife gets more and more boxed into the national parks that lots of people take great pleasure from when they go and visit as tourists, but that's like a tiny part of the story of that country. Out on the peripheries is another thing.
Sorry, you mentioned tourism and sort of going to some national parks, etc. When I was with you a few years ago in Tanzania, but in Ruaha, we visited the Carnival Project, and they were talking about bringing villagers from outside the park into the park. And the villagers all said, look, these are different lions. And they said, no, they're the same lions. They said, well, your lions are calm. But the ones that visit us at night, they're angry. They're trying to get into the boma to eat our cattle. Do you think that travel and the travel industry, maybe travel writers, should do more to talk about the human wildlife conflict and sort of and give local communities more of a voice, really, and also to show the dark and light, just not show the light of being in the park, but what's happening on the periphery?
Yeah, I mean,
there are lots of things there for you to
yeah,
to
there's a
try and
lot
answer.
to unpack there. I mean, there's a couple of things. We have to be really clear about the difference between tourism and travel, because there is a difference. Tourism, people want a nice holiday. They really don't want to see the difficult stuff. They're quite happy with the bubble being the bubble, and it being a beautiful parallel reality. That's how tourism works. It's a fantastical escape from everyday lives. I take holidays too. I know that feeling, but travel is a different thing. Travel as an encounter with otherness and is also an encounter with difficulty. And so, yeah, 100%, we should be writing, we should have space to write about that in newspapers and magazines. Of course we should, but we won't, because the business, the commerce dominates, not the difficult narratives. So that's why I write books. And to be fair, I also, there are certain publications that allow me to tell very serious stories. I mean, I write mostly for the Financial Times. They don't shy away from it, but the vast majority, it's a glossy, happy, shiny commercial world. And I know that you at Steps take it really seriously, and you do a hell of a lot to shine the light on the more difficult parts of conservation and the truer realities in conservation. That's why we've worked together. I know it's an important part of your remit at Steps, but it's not true of the industry at large at all.
Well, thank you for the plug there, and I agree with you that the industry at large needs to do a lot more. Otherwise, we're sort of killing the goose that lays the golden egg, unfortunately. You mentioned sort of, well, books again, but what have you got any upcoming projects? What are you working on next in terms of a book, or is it too early for you to divulge and say what it might be?
Well, I'm kind of poking around the Sahara. I think there's something there that could be good. It's a big fenceless landscape. It's got a huge depth of human history. I'm interested in that part of the world, and but I'm kind of there's when I commit, and my agent and publisher commits, it's like doing a degree. You're in it for 3 years in research and then a 2-year period where you're kind of catching up on the rewrites and getting the book out into the world. So it's a really big commitment. So I just want to be absolutely sure that in this geopolitically highly charged world, fast changing world, borders opening and closing, that I can achieve it. Because, Siberia, I was right on the nose. I was due to go in for my last trip and I had my visa revoked. So, I got it right there. I was like, by a day, I managed to get that book done. So it's a super sensitive. You've got to kind of think forward a bit, because I am interested in difficult places. But maybe if the border locks down on me, I can't do it. I can't finish it. So I've got to be careful about that.
Okay. You mentioned earlier your writing courses and you sort of helping people, assisting them, coaching other writers. What do you try and get across? Don't give everything away because they need to come on your course, but give them a little tidbit so that they can say, right, I want to come on Sophie's next course.
Well,
What do you
I
try and
do.
get?
I do too. I do one for the Arvon Foundation, which is an absolutely fantastic charity that has a couple of residential bases where various writers and poets and dramatists go in and teach on a weekly basis, even on a daily basis, and that you get a real mix of writer come along, and you have to judge it according to the level of experience, because some have never written more than a private diary, for instance. But if I try to encourage anything, it is to take the risk. It's to take the risk and try, because I think writing's the most beautiful, compelling career in the world. So if I can encourage anyone to take the risk, then that's a win. And so that really matters to me. And then I do another course. I teach with my dear colleague, a film photographer called Michael Turek.
He's the guy. He's the guy with a lot of hair, yeah.
Yeah, he's so good. And we've worked together in Russia. We've worked together on both books. And he teaches film photography alongside me teaching writing. And that's really nice because you see the confluence of the two art forms. And we do that in Nepal, in the Himalayas, at a place that is very dear to me, called the Happy House, where I've been going for, I don't know, 15 years. So yeah, I like the teaching. I
So,
really like the
so
teaching.
I'll come back to teaching in a minute. Sorry, but you just mentioned Michael Turek there. You've worked a lot with him. How does that work when you're in situ? Because you're after an interview time with people, and I don't know, how does it work? Do you have to sort of step away from each other and let each other have the limelight for a minute, or?
It's like, Michael's a very special human. He's got incredible patience. And also because the
And,
particular
and that's because he has to travel with you,
Yeah,
or
yeah, he
because
does. Yeah, no,
yeah,
he just does. He's
yeah.
just. We worked that out very early on. We were put on a job together by an American magazine many years ago, and I saw a patience in this man that I'd never seen in a photographer before. He works with film, medium format film, so sometimes he may just take one picture a day. That is an incredible thing in a world where digital, he
That's
takes
zero
one
S. Yeah.
picture. Yeah, and when he takes that one picture, he can't look in the back of his camera to see the picture he's taken. He has to accept he took that picture, and maybe he'll get it back in 2 months when we're back home off a job. So so that patience is kind of ingrained in him and how he works. And how does that cross over with the way that we interact with in place? It means that I can interview for 4 hours and it's loose. I'm getting trust. We're finding a rhythm. We're finding an energy. And I know, like he knows, that the light is just about to fall across the face of the subject in a way that I know and he knows we both understand, because we're like brother and sister. And yeah, and I will pull back. Mike will go, excuse me for a minute. Click, takes the picture. And and he's been able to set that camera up. He's already worked out the room, he's worked out the composition, he's worked out the energy and soul of this person, that he's been around for that period of time, which allows him to take incredibly powerful pictures. So yeah, it's a game of patience and sort of unspoken synergy that you acquire through a deep and meaningful collaboration with another artist.
Back to the travel writing, you were talking about, you talked about risk and taking risk. Is that your one piece of advice, or would it be sort of, again, and when you talk about risk, do you mean don't be afraid of failure, or
express yourself?
Express
yourself. Get words down on paper. I mean, I wrote what I wrote today was so bad. And I felt like if I ever had anything like
bad for you, but not for bad for the rest of
us. No, it was bad on every count. And I was feeling miserable about it about 5 o'clock. And then I kind of went back to it and I thought, well, you know what? I've got some bones down, and then you can start to flesh out the bones. You start to revise, you start to read. I'm right now I'm surrounded by Seamus Heaney. I went and picked up all his books off my shelves. I started reading, and he reminded me about the sheer energy of language. And so I can start to build on the bones. I can get reinvigorated by that energy. To be a good writer, you've got to be a passionate reader. I do think that. But to be to take that risk in the first place is the risk of failure, maybe, but you're not really failing because no one's really looking at it, and except for you and your most trusted friends. But yeah, I think it is risk. I think it's a really hard thing to say what you really think, both in a conversation like this, but also to say what you really think on paper. We've lost that art of letter writing. Emails, we never say what we think, we just say what we want. It's a totally different relationship with words. I want to use words to say how I feel, how I think. And yes, it's not easy.
You mentioned reading and Seamus Heaney, what you've been reading now, but when you were in your podcast with Paul Theroux, I think in series 2, was it, or series 1? I can't remember. But you both agree that you need to read what someone reads to understand them. And I don't know. And given how well read you are, what do you read?
I'm a total magpie.
You're eclectic.
I'm very eclectic. I do read a lot of poetry, because it's an easy thing to pick up and put down. At the moment, I'm reading Marilynne Robinson, American writer, who I love. I'm so eclectic. I'm so eclectic about it. You'll see with the podcast, sometimes I have biography in there, really academic biography. Leo Damrosch on Robert Louis Stevenson, a very good example. Absolutely brilliant book.
So you talked about the different people, and there are very different people on your podcast. Yeah. And as I said at the beginning, I would urge people to listen to it. I think it's very absorbing. And but how do you decide or choose who comes on the podcast? Is that
it's books. Books catch my attention. Writers I admire.
And books are catching your attention because you've been asked to review them, or you.
No, more because, so for instance, there's somebody I'm trying to get on who is written a brilliant book called Judith Shield about the Sahara. I want her to come on because I've read a book once, I loved it, and I want to talk to her. Who else? I wanted to talk to Paul Theroux because, he is a major player in the genre that I write in, which is travel writing, and he's got 80 years of experience of these extraordinary journeys and perspective. I want to hear him talk. It's a really selfish motive. Sometimes it's say,
Sorry to interrupt. You mentioned Paul Theroux being a major player, which he is, but not everybody that you interview is a major player. And is that important to you as well? That
oh
you're,
yeah.
yeah.
Oh, yeah, I think it's desperately important that good books don't always get big readerships. So I mean, it's desperately important. There's one book that I called in because I kind of got an inkling that had something about it that's privately published that I think I might put on the podcast. I don't want to, the podcast has a really committed listenership, and they they can get their popular reviews from the big media of the big travel books, but there are some super cool people doing interesting things on the periphery. So I mix it up. So yeah, you'll have Colin Thubron. Yeah, you'll have Paul Theroux. Yeah, you'll have Lise Doucette talking about her latest book, The Hotel Kabul. Wonderful, wonderful writers all. But what about the guys you've never heard of who are making crazy brilliant journeys and telling us about it in completely original language? I love that. Also work in translation. That's tricky. I've been trying to, can I work with the translator and the original writer at the same time as a part of a three-way podcast? I've been looking at that because it's some wonderful book work in translation. Yeah.
Just tangential, but you mentioned translation. That in Siberia and traveling around Russia, you must have been working with a translator the whole time. And again, that how did you choose that person? Does it come down to trust and sort of that working relationship with her? I think it was.
Yeah, a wonderful woman called Elena. It took me 5 goes to find the right interpreter. It's a really sensitive relationship. It's different from translation. Interpreting is being able to take a much bigger space and communicate it to you, and you can't kind of constantly interrupt with every 10 words like what's she saying, what's he saying. It's a really complex thing, and the interpreters I work with have to be able to also work at my pace, so and be comfortable with the fact that there's no room booked that evening and we might not know where we eat. That takes a certain character, and this woman was just a miracle, and a very good friend, and she stuck by me through some pretty tricky times. I was fortunate in Tanzania as well, through a friend of a friend. I found a brilliant man, Rem Tula Nasari, who helped me every step of the way. But yeah, it's a sensitive relationship, and I've learnt my lessons when it goes wrong, very wrong. But yeah.
And where next? Where are you next off to, traveling to?
Oh, I'm going to
And
Chad.
can I carry your bags?
They're not chic enough, I don't think, for you. So
Chic bags. This is the last thing I have.
I'm hopefully going to Chad, to do some work. Egypt to do some work. So yeah, it's sort of beginning to build up into something, I hope. And then west coast of Ireland again with
But
Michael.
Egypt is more than the Grand Egyptian Museum, which is well worth seeing. I was there a couple of months ago, and I think it's absolutely incredible, the building itself and the layout and just but I presume it's more than that.
Yeah,
And maybe you can't say, but
no, what I'm interested in is an idea, which is very ancient art. So maybe it's the hand on a cave that's had the paint blown around its fingers, or maybe it's a portrait from 2000 years ago that was placed over the face of a mummy. I'm absolutely obsessed by how modern those things can feel, and that idea around the shock of that proximity, where you feel that those people are living here right now in this room. And it's exactly the same feeling I had to go back to Peter Sudi when he told me that the gentleman of 1879 was his great uncle. It's the same shiver down my spine, that the past was right there, right in the room with me. And I want to explore that idea. And I think Egypt is a very good place for it, because I've spent time in Egypt before, in like Nefertiti's tomb and whatnot, and I've had that feeling. So I now need to organize that feeling into some kind of a journey, I think. But these are early days.
And you mentioned Chad. I presume it's up north in Neri, but I've not been there. But there must be some pretty impressive rock art there as well. Or
Yeah, I've spent time in Chad in the Enedi, and that's what I want to go back to see more of, where it's a very peculiar thing to look at images of rhino that once roamed a green Sahara carved into a rock, to see elephants, inscribed into stone in a place that just looks dead. And it reminds you that once these places were fantastically alive, and in terms of that kind of ecosystem. So I'm really interested by that. So we'll see. I mean, it's complicated trying to get to the places I want to go, but we'll
well, you know, a
see.
good tour operator if you need any help, Sophie. So we're there for you. We're there for you. You mentioned the animals that once were alive. We talked a bit about biodiversity decline. Are you pessimistic or optimistic about the future, or are you with Jane Goodall, and that you have to have hope?
I'm with Jane Goodall. We all should be with Jane Goodall because, wow.
Yeah.
I think we all should have hope. But am I pessimistic? Yes. I remember as a child collecting frog spawn, and toads were an everyday thing, and hedgehogs were all over the place, and just like sticklebacks, minnows, they were just like part of my childhood. And now it'd be like, oh, look, if I saw that. It's not there anymore. And I live in a beautiful part of West Dorset, which is in relatively good shape, in terms of what appears to be natural. But I'm pretty pessimistic about it, which is, hope is the only option, but my reality is pessimistic. And that's not always easy, because in the publishing industry, especially, there is demand for redemption. The story has to end well. Hollywood has taught us to want that happy ending, and the demand for those kind of stories, especially in very, very difficult times that we're living in now, has never been greater. Give me an escape, give me beauty, give me hope. And sometimes when you're a reporter, which I am, that hope becomes a false redemption. And I struggle with that hugely, if that makes sense.
It totally makes sense. We're coming close to the end, and I unfortunately I can't see if there's any questions coming through. So if you are listening and you have posted a question, I'm sorry, we'll try and answer it afterwards with Sophie, unless you can see anything, Sophie. But for some reason I can't see them. But I was going to ask you one last question then. What, if anything, does give you hope? To try and end on a less pessimistic note.
My kids, my two boys, who have got their eyes wide open, whose generation want a better world. Absolutely, they give me hope, and I love that. They're the ones that make me think we've got a chance. Curiosity, which we started with. My kids have curiosity. I think children have curiosity. And curiosity is the precursor to wonder. It really is. And so, as long as we can continue to value that and not kill it with iPhones and all the rest of it, then we have a chance. But yeah, the next generation gives me hope. And it's like, don't you feel like that when you go for dinner with friends, and the ones I want to sit next to every time are the kids? I love talking to the 18, 19, 20-year-olds, whatever they are, who are coming back at me with all sorts of ideas, all sorts of ambitions. I just love that. I find it electrifying. And so, yeah.
I'm sure the feeling is mutual, that they all want to sit next to you as well, and that it's equally electrifying, and they love it. And I know that I don't know, travel can give you some very interesting stories and chat, but yeah, it's all up to you. But it must be a pleasure to sit next to you at a dinner party, and I hope to be able to do so in the not too distant future. But Sophie, it's so wonderful to speak to you. We could carry on for a while, but I'm afraid we are out of time. So thank you very much for this evening. And thank you all for listening. And please tune in, I think, in 2 weeks' time on the 21st, when we'll be speaking with Kate Humble. So she's got a hard act to follow, Sophie. Thank you very much indeed.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much indeed for having me. And yeah, it's always a pleasure, Justin. So thanks.